At the dawn of the 20th century, the mighty Ottoman Empire was but a shadow of its former glory. Once a vast dominion stretching across 3 continents, it now staggered under the weight of decades of corruption, lost wars, and foreign interference. European powers, watching its slow decline, mockingly dubbed it the sick man of Europe. By 1909, the empire's fate took another sharp turn. Sultan Abdul Hamid II, the autocrat who had ruled with an iron fist for over 3 decades, was overthrown in a dramatic coup. In his place, a new force emerged, the Young Turks. Reformists, nationalists, and idealists, they vowed to restore the empire's strength and dignity. But the task before them was monumental. Internal rivalries simmered beneath the surface. External enemies circled like vultures, eager to claim the last pieces of Ottoman land. The empire's territories in Europe had already been reduced to a fraction of their former size after the humiliating defeats of the Balkan Wars. The once unstoppable empire stood at a crossroads, and its next choice would decide whether it would rise from the ashes or vanish into the pages of history forever. Amid the ruins of recent defeats, one man's voice grew louder in the halls of power: War Minister Enver Pasha. To him, the empire's survival lay not in neutrality, but in choosing the right ally before it was too late. His eyes turned to Germany, a rising industrial and military powerhouse, as the shield that could protect the Ottomans from Russian ambition and Balkan revenge. In late 1913, the decision began to take shape. The arrival of a German military mission, led by the formidable General Lehmann von Sanders, signaled more than mere cooperation. It was a lifeline. Von Sanders would train, reorganize, and modernize the Ottoman army, breathing discipline into a force battered by years of failure. But Enver Pasha's gamble was dangerous. The empire was still vulnerable, its enemies many. While some leaders urged caution and neutrality, Enver believed that inaction would only hasten the empire's death. He saw the coming war as an opportunity, a chance to reclaim lost honor and prove that the Ottoman Empire was not yet ready for the grave. The die had not yet been cast, but the empire was already moving toward a fateful alliance that would drag it into the greatest conflict the world had ever seen. The summer of 1914 brought the spark that would set the world ablaze, the Great War. And for the Ottomans, an unexpected twist pushed them closer to Germany than ever before. 2 powerful Ottoman battleships, paid for with public donations, were being built in British shipyards. But as war broke out, Britain seized them without warning. The outrage across the empire was electric. It felt like betrayal. Then, fate intervened. Fleeing the guns of the Royal Navy, 2 German warships, the battlecruiser Goeben and the light cruiser Episcopal Bresla, slipped into the Dardanelles and sailed triumphantly into Istanbul. Their arrival was greeted like a miracle. Germany offered them as a gift to the Ottoman Navy, on one condition: they would continue their mission against Russia. Flying the Ottoman flag, these ships steamed into the Black Sea and bombarded Russian ports. It was an act of war, and it sealed the empire's fate. The Ottomans were now firmly in the camp of the Central Powers. The Dardanelles and Bosphorus, the empire's narrow waterways, were slammed shut to Allied shipping, a move that would choke Russia's lifeline and set the stage for one of the most daring campaigns in history. With the straits closed, Russia's Black Sea lifeline was cut. Grain, weapons, and supplies could no longer flow to its Western allies. Britain and France now faced a brutal reality. If they could not reopen the Dardanelles, Russia might collapse under the weight of the war. Plans were drawn in London and Paris for a bold strike. They would send their most powerful fleets to smash through the Ottoman coastal defenses, sweep up the Dardanelles, and sail into the very heart of the empire. From there, they could link up with Russia, knock the Ottomans out of the war, and perhaps even open a new front against Germany. But the Ottomans were watching. On November 3, 1914, before any formal declaration of war, British and French warships appeared off the fort of Sedabahir and opened fire. Shells screamed into the stone walls, one blast igniting a magazine and killing 86 defenders. The attack revealed 2 harsh truths. The Allies were coming for the straits, and the Ottoman defenses were woefully outdated. Under the sharp eye of General Lehmann von Sanders, work began in earnest. Coastal guns repaired, minefields laid, searchlights mounted, and underwater nets stretched across the channel. The Dardanelles would become a death trap. By early 1915, the trap was set. The narrow waters of the Dardanelles bristled with hidden dangers. Lines of mines lay in wait beneath the waves, coastal guns stood ready, and every bend of the strait was a killing zone. On February 19th, the Allies made their first move. British and French dreadnoughts roared to life, pounding the Ottoman forts at Sed el-Bahir and Kumkale from a distance. Smoke rose over the coast, but when the enemy ships crept closer to assess the damage, Ottoman artillery suddenly thundered back, forcing them to retreat. The defenders had shown their teeth. Then came March 18th, the day the Allies believed they would finally break through. Wave after wave of mighty warships surged into the strait, their guns blasting the hillsides. But the sea itself turned against them. The French battleship Bouvet struck a mine and capsized in minutes, taking nearly her entire crew to the depths. Panic spread. HMS Irresistible and HMS Ocean met the same fate, torn open by explosions. Admiral John de Robeck had no choice but to call the retreat. For the Ottomans, it was a stunning victory, the day they shattered the myth of Allied naval supremacy. But both sides knew this was far from over. The next battle would be fought on land. The smoke of the naval battle had barely cleared when Ottoman scouts brought grim news. The Allies were preparing a land invasion. If they could not force the Dardanelles from the sea, they would take the forts from behind. General Lehman von Sanders, commander of the Ottoman Fifth Army, knew the stakes. If Gallipoli fell, the straits would be lost, and with them, the empire's lifeline. But the peninsula's coastline stretched for miles, and he lacked the men to defend every inch. Von Sanders chose a bold strategy, defense in depth. Instead of crowding the beaches with troops, he placed only small units there, tasked with delaying the landings. The main force would wait inland, ready to counterattack the moment the Allies revealed their true landing sites. Key positions were fortified, trenches carved deep into rocky hills, barbed wire coiled like steel serpents, and machine guns placed to sweep entire beaches with fire. Artillery batteries, both modern and outdated, were stationed to cover every likely approach. Among von Sanders' commanders were two men who would become legends, Halil Sami at Cape Helles, and a young, relentless officer named Mustafa Kemal, guarding the ridges of the Aegean coast. The trap was ready. All that remained was to wait for the enemy to come ashore. The night of April 24, 1915 was unnervingly calm. Out in the dark waters, a massive Allied armada crept toward Gallipoli. Thousands of soldiers, British, French, Australians, and New Zealanders, waited in silence, their rifles slung, bayonets fixed. At 2:30 a.m., Ottoman lookouts at Ari Burnu spotted ghostly shapes on the horizon. The moon dipped below the sea, plunging the waters into darkness again. Then, just before dawn, the shadows returned. This time, unmistakable. Boats. Dozens of them. At 4:20 a.m., the first ANZAC troops splashed into the shallows. Thinly spread Ottoman defenders, perched on the steep slopes above, opened fire. Bullets cracked through the air, cutting men down before they could reach cover. Yet still they came, wave after wave, scrambling over rocks and sand. The defenders fought fiercely, but the sheer number of Allied soldiers forced some positions to fall. In the chaos, small Ottoman squads maneuvered along the ridges, pouring fire into the attackers and stalling their climb. Communication lines buzzed with urgent calls for reinforcements. By mid-morning, the Allies had a tenuous foothold, but every step inland came at a terrible cost. Gallipoli had erupted into a storm of lead and blood, and the true test of the Ottoman defense was only beginning. In the chaos of the landings, one man's resolve would change the course of the battle: Mustafa Kemal. Stationed inland with the 19th Division, Kemal received urgent reports. ANZAC forces were pushing up the ridges toward the high ground. If they seized those peaks, the Ottoman defense would crumble. Kemal did not wait for orders. He marched his men toward the danger, intercepting retreating Ottoman troops along the way. "Why are you running?" he demanded. "We have no ammunition," they replied. His answer was stark. "Fix bayonets. Lie down." The exhausted soldiers obeyed, and as the ANZAC troops appeared over the ridge, they were met with a wall of steel and unflinching eyes. Then came his most famous command: "I do not order you to attack. I order you to die. In the time it takes us to die, other troops and commanders will come and take our place." It was a grim order, but his men obeyed without hesitation. Bayonets flashed, gunfire thundered, and the ANZAC advance was thrown back down the slopes. On that bloody morning, Mustafa Kemal had not only saved the ridges, he had cemented his place as the empire's most formidable battlefield commander. By mid-1915, Gallipoli had become a battlefield of exhaustion. The front lines barely moved, just a few hundred meters gained or lost after days of slaughter. Trenches scarred the ridges and valleys, filled with mud, flies, and the stench of death. Both sides launched costly offensives, only to be driven back by machine gun fire and relentless artillery. Ottoman soldiers fought with dwindling supplies, often rationing ammunition and going hungry for days. The heat of summer baked the peninsula by day, while cold nights gnawed at weary men who slept in shallow dugouts. Disease spread faster than bullets. Yet the Ottomans endured. Every failed Allied push strengthened their resolve. In October, a vital lifeline was secured. A land route through Bulgaria connected the empire to Germany. Soon, heavy artillery arrived, capable of pounding Allied trenches and supply dumps with devastating accuracy. For the Allies, morale plummeted. Hopes of a swift victory had withered into the grim reality of a drawn-out war. For the Ottomans, it was proof that the enemy could be held, if they could just survive the endless grind. Gallipoli had become a war of attrition, and the clock was no longer on the Allies' side. By the closing months of 1915, the Allied gamble at Gallipoli was collapsing. Months of bloodshed had yielded nothing but shattered bodies and broken morale. Winter storms lashed the peninsula, flooding trenches and freezing men where they stood. Supplies rotted in the mud. In London and Paris, the verdict was grim. The campaign was lost. A withdrawal was the only option. But to pull out over 140,000 soldiers under the eyes of the enemy would require absolute secrecy. Through December and into January, under the cover of darkness, the Allies executed one of the most skillful evacuations in military history. Equipment was quietly removed, rifles were rigged to fire themselves as decoys, and step by step, the beaches emptied. By the time Ottoman sentries realized what had happened, the enemy was gone. Gallipoli belonged to the Ottomans. It was a victory paid for in blood. 56,000 dead, 97,000 wounded, and thousands more missing. Yet it became a symbol of defiance, proving that the sick man of Europe could still strike a powerful blow. For Mustafa Kemal, it was the birth of a legend. For the Ottoman Empire, it was one final shining triumph, before the darkness of war closed in again. The Gallipoli Campaign was more than just a failed invasion. It was a brutal test of endurance, courage, and sacrifice. For the Allies, it was a bitter humiliation, a reminder that even the mightiest empires could stumble. For the Ottoman Empire, it was a costly but defining victory, one that forged the legend of Mustafa Kemal and reshaped the destiny of a nation. Out of the mud, blood, and fire of Gallipoli rose not only tragedy, but also the seeds of modern Turkey. Gallipoli remains a battlefield where history itself was rewritten.